Shadow Slave by Guiltythree. Chapter 16, Rebirth. Sunny felt something waking up inside of him. With a startled cry, he clutched his chest and stared into the darkness, trying to understand what was happening. The feeling was not painful or unpleasant, yet it was like nothing he had ever experienced. It was as though his soul was being shaken awake, infused with strange new energy. However, that energy did not come from some outside source. Rather, it was coming from within, as though it had always been there, sleeping. The energy filled every fiber of his being. Sunny felt his emotions becoming clearer and sharper. Then, his body began to change, too. He felt as though a miniature star was burning in the center of his chest. Waves of heat were radiating from it, slowly reaching his stomach and shoulders, then his arms and legs, then his hands and feet. Under that heat, his bones, muscles, organs and blood vessels were being rebuilt and revitalized. Sunny felt like he was being reborn. He was becoming stronger, faster, healthier. It was euphoric. With each second, his transformation was becoming more profound. New confidence settled in Sunny's heart. He was not a weak, frail street kid anymore. He was not as vulnerable against anyone who would wish to bully him as he was in the past. With his powers awakened and his will tempered by the horrors of the first nightmare, he was now someone you would not want to cross. After some time had passed, the star burning in his chest finally cooled down. The heat was replaced with a soothing coldness. That coldness washed over Sunny's body, taking away all the aches and discomforts that had been accumulated there over the years. Then it moved up, reaching his brain and, finally, his eyes. His vision strangely doubled. He could still see the void populated by an endless pattern of stars. But he could also see something different. A silent, calm dark sea illuminated by a lonely black sun. From his previous knowledge, Sunny knew that this was his so-called Sea of Soul. But he also knew that it was supposed to look quite different. For starters, it was supposed to be much more lively. The star hanging above, the visual representation of his soul core, was supposed to be burning with bright light, filling the soul sea with a warm, blinding shining. However, Sunny's soul was dark and lightless. That's strange. He took a look at the black sun. At a closer examination, it actually turned out to be transparent. It's just that with no other major source of light around, the star had appeared to be as dark as its surroundings. Also, no one was supposed to be here except for him. It was his soul, after all. But Sunny had a nagging feeling that somewhere just beyond the periphery of his vision, hidden in the darkness, shapeless forms were constantly moving. No matter how he turned his head, he couldn't catch a clear glimpse of them. And yet the feeling would not go away. Not wishing to waste any more time on this right now, Sunny turned back to the black sun and finally spotted two spheres of light orbiting around it, as though caught in the soul core's gravity well. A subtle smile appeared on his face. These were his memories, Silver Bell and Puppeteer's Shroud. Later, there would be dozens of such spheres here. If he was lucky, he would even acquire an echo or two. The spell's voice suddenly pulled him out of the sea of soul. Awakening aspect ability. This is it. The moment of truth, Sunny thought. Divine aspect or not, his immediate future still depended on the first aspect ability he would receive. His role in the dream realm would be based on its characteristics. If it was a combat ability, he would be most useful on the front lines of the bloody battles against the nightmare creatures. If it was tied to sorcery, he would likely become a powerful but fragile ranged fighter. If it was something having to do with utility, he would be a vitally important part of the behind-the-scenes workings of the dream realm. Utility abilities were also extremely valued in the real world, where Awaken performed many tasks that kept it going. If he was lucky, he could even become a healer. Healers were very rare, and as such, sought-after specialists. Aspect ability acquired. Aspect ability name, Shadow Control. Sunny hurriedly summoned the runes. He wanted to go to the description of his new ability right away, but then decided to give his overall information a look first. Name, Sunless. True name, Lost from Light. Rank, Dreamer. Shadow Core, Dormant. Shadow Fragments, 12/1000. What? What is that? Where the rank of his soul core was supposed to be written, a mysterious Shadow Core appeared instead. Sunny looked at it, blinking. He had never heard of anyone having a different kind of core before. Was he that unique? This enigmatic shadow core would certainly explain why his sea of soul looked so strange. And also, he moved his eyes down, noticing the shadow fragments counter. Usually, there was supposed to be an indicator of the number of soul shards consumed. However, it was nowhere to be seen. Do I actually have a completely different progression path than all awakened? The idea was as exciting as it was frightening. Not having to fight for resources with anybody else was an incredible advantage. Most of the human society in the dream realm was built around the acquisition of soul shards. If he had no need to gather them to evolve, not only would he be able to become more powerful with incredible speed, he would also be completely self-sufficient. On the other hand, he had no idea how to acquire these shadow fragments. However, he had gotten 12 of them somehow already, so whatever it was that he had to do, he had already done it in the first nightmare. I'll have to explore this carefully. Satisfied with this decision, Sunny continued to study the runes. Memories, Silver Bell, Puppeteer's Shroud. Echoes, Attributes, Fated, Mark of Divinity, Child of Shadows. Aspect, Shadow Slave. Aspect Rank, Divine. Aspect Abilities, Shadow Control. Aspect Ability Description, your shadow is more independent than most. It is an invaluable helper. What is that supposed to mean? Sunny held his breath and began to read the description again, but at that moment, a new set of runes appeared just below it. Simultaneously, the spell's voice resounded in the black void. All power has a price. You have received a flaw. Your flaw is... Sunny read the runes, and his eyes widened in horror. Oh, no. No, no, no. Chapter 17, 3 Simple Words. He closed his eyes, then opened them again, hoping that the runes would disappear. Please, be gone. Please. But the runes were still there, shining slightly, as though mocking him. Flaw, clear conscience. Flaw description, you cannot lie. Sunny stared at these 3 simple words, feeling like there was a bottomless abyss opening right beneath his feet. The spell, which was usually frivolous with its descriptions, decided to be straight and on point this time. There were only 3 words. They left him no room to maneuver. Can't lie. I can't lie. Me. How am I supposed to live if I can't lie? Sunny's very survival was predicated on his ability to deceive and outsmart other people. Even the spell itself congratulated him on his treachery. Without the ability to lie, he wouldn't be able to achieve anything. Not to mention, his heart suddenly felt as though it was about to stop. If he could only tell the truth, how was he supposed to hide his true name? Wouldn't anyone be able to turn him into an obedient slave by simply asking a couple of innocent questions? Sunny was about to scream and curse, but at that moment, the spell spoke again. Wake up, lost from light. The black void spun and disappeared. Sunny opened his eyes. The armored ceiling of the police station's vault hung above him. No one would call its aesthetics beautiful, but to him, it was the most majestic sight. Only now did he realize how much he had missed the real world. It was safe and familiar. There were no monsters or slavers. Well, at least officially. There was no constant fear of torturous death. It was home. In addition, Sunny felt incredible. The cold that had crept deep into his bones during the nightmare was gone, taking with it all the pain that his wounded body had been enduring day after day. His feet and wrists were not in agony, his back had forgotten the bite of the whip, and he could even breathe without feeling the sharp edges of his broken ribs cutting deeper and deeper into his lungs. What a blessing. The sudden disappearance of pain, coupled with the new vitality that permeated his body, almost made Sunny cry. I really survived. He slowly looked down and then froze, breathless. On a cheap plastic chair placed beside his reinforced medical bed sat the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She had short, raven black hair and icy blue eyes. Her flawless skin was smooth, supple, and as white as snow. Actually, this was Sunny's first time meeting someone as pale as he himself was. However, while Sunny's pallor looked strange and unhealthy, the beautiful stranger was nothing short of striking. The woman seemed to be in her late 20s. She was wearing a dark blue uniform with silver epaulets and black leather boots. The jacket of her uniform was casually unbuttoned, revealing a black tank top beneath. Currently, she was stretching her arms above her head, clearly bored and sleepy. The gesture forced the thin fabric to tighten, provocatively accentuating her full breasts. Mesmerized, Sunny almost missed the fact that there was a shoulder insignia on the woman's left sleeve. There were 3 stars on it. 3 stars, huh, he thought, distracted. 3 stars means an ascended, huh, yeah. Wait. An ascended. But before Sunny could fully digest the meaning of this word, he realized that the woman was staring at him, too. "What are you looking at?" she said, not a gram of humor in her voice. Sunny blinked a couple of times, embarrassed, and quickly came up with an excuse. Then he opened his mouth and answered, "Your breasts." A second later, his eyes widened in absolute horror. Because he wasn't planning to say those words at all. His mouth moved on its own. A wave of terror suddenly drowned his mind. The woman slowly smiled with a dangerous gleam in her eyes. Then, without any warning, she moved her hand and slapped Sunny across the face. Sunny's whole body was turned around. If it wasn't for the restraints holding him in place, he would have probably flown off the bed. For a moment, he even saw stars. But it could still be considered getting off lightly. An ascended, the woman was an ascended. She could have torn his head clean off with a flick of a finger. Why did he have to offend someone so powerful, of all people? Meanwhile, the woman cleared her throat and crossed her arms. "Are you awake now?" Sunny held his numb cheek and carefully nodded. "Good. Let me give you a piece of advice, don't just say anything that comes to your mind. Especially to girls. It's not like you haven't seen a girl before, right? Say thank you." "I definitely will not," Sunny thought. But instead, his mouth moved on its own, and he said, "I've seen plenty, but no one as beautiful as you." Then he flinched back, his face as red as a lobster. The woman stared at him for a few seconds and then burst into laughter. "I see you haven't met a lot of awakened then. By awakened standards, I'm below average." Sunny glanced at her with doubt. The woman shook her head. "As your soul core develops, the body gets rid of all its imperfections. So it's hard to find an unattractive awakened, especially among the stronger ones. Live long enough, and you might just become a flower boy yourself." Then she gave him a thorough look and added, "Well, maybe. In any case, since you're awake, welcome back to the land of the living. Congratulations on surviving your first nightmare, Sleeper Sunless." Sleeper Sunless. That was how people would address him now, at least in the short span of days until the winter solstice. After that, he would either return from the dream realm as an awakened or not return at all. It felt strange to have a title put before his name. In the past, Sunny was rarely even addressed by name. People mostly called him things like boy, punk, brat, or hey, you. But now he even had a title. Sleeper Sunless. Actually, the correct term was dreamer. But humans had their own set of words for those infected by the nightmare spell. Carriers who had just finished their first nightmare were called sleepers because of how they interacted with the spell. Basically, once his spirit enters the spell, his body was going to fall into slumber. That slumber would continue for days, weeks, or even months, however long it takes him to escape the dream realm. Hence the term sleeper. Once he escapes and becomes an awakened, he would live his life normally during the day and return to the dream realm every time he falls asleep. The awakened were called the same by the spell and the humans. That word was also sometimes used as a general term for all carriers. Then, if he were to decide to enter a second nightmare and manage to survive, he would become an ascended. People called them masters. Masters could enter and exit the dream realm as they wished. Some even chose to never come back there at all. More than that, they traveled between the worlds physically, not just in spirit. And then, above the masters, there were saints, those who had conquered the third nightmare and earned the right to call themselves transcendent. They were as powerful as demigods, and even more rare. Not only could they travel between the real world and the dream realm, but they could also take others with them. But coming back to masters. The beautiful woman stood up and approached the reinforced medical bed. With practiced moves, she began to undo the restraint holding Sunny in place. "I am Ascended Jet. You can call me Master Jet. These past 3 days, I was on watch duty due to your nightmare. Right. Before I fell asleep, the policeman told me that an awakened would arrive in a few hours to monitor my condition. To kill the nightmare creature if I die and let it through. Sonny was unwilling to open his mouth, terrified that all sorts of truths would come spilling out. But there were things he simply had to know. Master Jet. I have a question. Go on. Why would a master be put on watch duty? Isn't it below your pay grade? Jet gave him a dark look. You're smarter than you seem. Recently, there were a lot of gates opening in this sector. Most of the local awakened are either wounded or occupied with the cleanup. Or dead. It's always like that close to the winter solstice. She opened the final restraint and took a step back. Plus, there's not a lot of awakened who, like me, directly work for the government. It's by far the least lucrative or glorious career one of us can choose. Would you abandon wealth and fame to work abysmal hours and risk your life, fueled only by altruism and sense of duty? Sonny wanted to say something flattering. Instead, he looked Master Jet right in the eyes and smirked. Of course not. I'm not an idiot. Damn this damn flaw. Damn. She stared at him with a humorless expression. Sonny thought that he was going to get slapped again. But instead, Jet smiled. See, I was right. You really are smart. Chapter 18, Absence of Light. Sonny was enjoying a hot shower. After their short conversation, Master Jet had sent him to clean himself, saying that he reeked of nightmare. The unnatural slumber of the spell would slow down the body's metabolism, and the medical apparatus he had been strapped into was supposed to take care of the rest, but he was still asleep for 3 whole days. Even if only psychological, the scent of bloodshed and despair lingered around him. Ah, I'm in heaven, Sonny thought, willing himself to temporarily forget about the looming disaster of the flaw. He was alone in the police station's showers, relaxing under the streams of hot water. After a bit of time had passed, Sonny reluctantly turned the tap off and walked over to the towel rack. Coincidentally, he saw himself reflecting in the mirror. The changes in his physique were subtle but noticeable. His pale skin seemed a little healthier, his muscles a bit more pronounced. He looked slender and lean instead of emaciated and frail, as he did before. There was a slight luster to his dark hair and a shine to his eyes. However, he was still rather diminutive. Not exactly a picture of masculine handsomeness, to say the least. Flower boy, huh? Sonny thought, full of bitterness. Then he suddenly froze, noticing something strange. As he was looking at himself in the mirror, the reflection of his shadow seemed to move. It was as though the shadow lowered its head and quietly face-palmed. Sonny quickly turned around, piercing his shadow with a nervous look. However, everything seemed normal. The shadow was doing exactly what it was supposed to do, repeating his every motion. I clearly saw you move, he said, feeling a bit strange. You have just moved on your own, right? Sonny glared at the shadow, which obediently glared back. Did you move or not? The shadow enthusiastically shook its head. What the? What do you mean, no? You've just moved your head. Do you think I'm a fool? The shadow seemed to think for a bit and then shrugged. Sonny was left with his mouth agape. Your shadow is more independent than most. It is an invaluable helper, he muttered finally. Right. This was how the spell had described his aspect ability. But what exactly could his shadow do? He decided to experiment a little. Hey, you. Tell me what you can do. The shadow was silent and motionless. Right. It doesn't have vocal cords. As though that made any sense. Shadows were not supposed to have muscles either, and yet it knew how to move. Ah, show me. No reaction. It seems the shadow was content pretending to be an ordinary, lifeless blob of darkness. Sonny sighed. I'm doing this wrong. Independent or not, the shadow was still a part of him. It was a manifestation of his aspect ability. So instead of asking the shadow, he really should have been asking himself. Not going to talk, are you? Sonny closed his eyes and directed his perception within, exploring himself for the first time since returning to the real world. He felt the beating of his heart, the steady rising of his chest, the slight chill of the shower room. He heard droplets of water falling on the tiled floor. Felt the movement of filtered air against his skin. And there, on the verge of his consciousness, something new. A completely new sense. Sonny concentrated on it, and suddenly a whole other world opened to him. It was hard to describe with words, just like one would have trouble explaining how hearing or touch feels. It was as though he could communicate with vast forms that crowded around him and receive an understanding of both their own shape and the surrounding space, guided by the different degrees of pressure they exerted on his mind and each other. That understanding came naturally and instantaneously, like an instinct. These forms were shadows. And among them, one, not the largest one, but the deepest, didn't feel like an external entity. It was like a part of his soul. Once Sonny grasped the feeling of it, he could sense the shadow just like he sensed his limbs. The only thing was that his limbs were made out of flesh, and the shadow was made from the absence of light. Sonny opened his eyes and looked at the shadow. Then, with a thought, he willed it to raise an arm. The shadow raised an arm. He willed it to sit, stand, turn around, and kick. Then he willed it to change shape, turning into a circle, then a line, then a monster. And finally, back to his own silhouette. The shadow was mercurial and fluid, like water. The only constant was its size. Ha! How about that? The shadow pouted, then reluctantly raised its thumbs. But how are you useful? He willed the shadow to strike the towel rack. It obediently moved and delivered a powerful kick. Of course, since it was just a shadow, its leg passed over the towels harmlessly, not even causing them to sway a little. Is that all you can do? In his mind, the image of shadow tentacles tearing the mighty tyrant into little pieces cracked and shattered mercilessly. It seemed he would not be competing with Shadow God anytime soon. How regretful. The shadow looked at him with disdain. Then it shrugged and stopped moving altogether, clearly offended. Sonny sighed and took a towel off the rack. All right. I will explore it later. A few minutes after that, he was wearing a clean police-issued tracksuit and heading for the cafeteria. Master Jet was waiting for him at one of the tables, with 2 trays full of steaming synthetic food in front of her. Help yourself. Sonny glanced at the cheap gruel, which was not so different from the stuff he used to consume in the outskirts, and sighed. Somehow, he had expected his first meal after becoming a sleeper to be more lavish. Still, it was food. He sat down and began to wolf down the gruel ravenously. He was very, very hungry. In the process, his thoughts began to wander. Sonny stole a glance at Jet and wondered. The spell told him to find a master, and the next thing he knew there was a woman calling herself master right in front of him. He tried to imagine being an obedient slave to someone like her. Weird thoughts started to appear in his mind. You know what, Sonny, he thought with dark irony. Knowing your luck, this would be a perfect moment for her to ask. What are you thinking about? Sonny choked on the gruel. He felt his mouth beginning to open, and put all of his will into staying silent. A second passed without him saying anything. Then a weird pressure appeared in his mind, which soon turned into blinding pain. He endured it for a couple more seconds before giving up. I was thinking that it would be a perfect moment for you to ask me about what I am thinking, he finally said. Jet gave him a weird look. All right. Are you almost finished with your food? Sonny nodded. Then I'll begin. As per protocol, I am obligated to inform you of a few things. It is mostly a formality. First of all, concerning your nightmare. She glanced at him and sighed. You are entitled to receive free psychological counseling. No matter what traumatic experience you have encountered, there is no shame in asking for help. Your mind is as important as your body, it's only right to keep it healthy. Are you interested? Sonny shook his head. Jet shrugged and continued, as you wish. You can also talk to me. Was it very hard? How could he answer? It was simultaneously much worse than I expected and exactly as bad as I expected. She nodded, satisfied with that explanation. That's a good attitude. I won't pry any further. Us outskirt rats are way more resilient than people think. Sonny looked at her in surprise. Master Jet, you grew up in the outskirts. She grinned. What? You can't tell because of my exquisite manners and polished exterior. He blinked a couple of times, surprised. I couldn't tell at all. After thinking for a while, he added, are there a lot of people like us among the awakened? Jet's smile disappeared. No. There's not. In fact, they can be counted on one hand. As expected. Odds were really stacked against people like them. That made the 3 stars on Jet's insignia even more exceptional. One day, I'll be a master too. If she can do it, why can't I? So, what happens now? What else are you obligated to tell me? Sunny had no idea what he was supposed to do after leaving the police station. The winter solstice was just several weeks away. Jet leaned back and answered, that's basically it. There are some additional hoops to jump through, mostly having to do with your family, but, well, I've read your file, so I know it doesn't apply. The only thing left is to decide how you will be preparing for your first journey into the dream realm. She looked at her communicator and grimaced. I must stay, your luck is exceptionally bad. There's not a lot of time at all. First of all, you are free to do what you want. No one is forcing you to make a certain decision. That is to say, you can choose to prepare on your own, or not prepare at all. Party until the lights go out. Sunny was not very well versed in partying. However, I would advise against that. As a sleeper, you are also entitled to enroll in the Awakened Academy. You'll be provided with food, lodging, and a wide choice of preparatory classes. This late into the year, you won't be able to learn a lot. But it's better than nothing. She was silent for a few seconds, then added, more importantly, you will get acquainted with most of the people who will enter the dream realm with you. Some of them might become your companions for life. And some may end up trying to end that life once were inside the spell, Sunny added, reading between the lines of what Master Jet had said. So, what do you say? Do you want me to take you to the academy? Sunny thought about it. Strangely, his flaw was silent, not forcing him to answer one way or the other. Is it because I haven't made up my mind yet? Finally, he looked down at his empty tray, and made a decision. Free lodging and food, you say? Yeah. I want to go to the academy.